Welcome to the Leadership Reckoning Room, the space where leaders are brave enough to look in the mirror and do the real work. I'm Steph, and today we light the lantern with someone who shaped my own leadership more than he could ever know. Chris Yates has spent his career transforming how people grow inside some of the world's most iconic companies, leading learning and organizational development at Caterpillar, guiding global L&D at Microsoft, serving as Chief Talent Officer at Ford, and now shaping the future of talent as SVP at Equinix. He's also a best-selling author. But titles aren't why he's here. Chris is one of the most profoundly human-centered leaders I've ever known. A leader who listens deeply, leads with courage, builds cultures where people feel truly seen. A leader I've learned so much from, and a leader I would follow anywhere. He's the kind of leader we need every leader to be. So take a breath, set down whatever armor you've walked in with, and step into the reckoning with us. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Steph.
I'm so excited you're here. And I just wanted to share again with everybody listening. I chose you to be my very first podcast guest because of how you shaped and lit like a spark for me around how critically important human-centered leadership is. You taught me what it was, you modeled the way for me, and you changed me as a leader and as an employee of what I expect from my leaders. So you kind of lit the spark for me in all of this. And so I felt it was only fitting to have you be my first guest that I get to come talk with about all things human-centered leadership. So I'm so happy you're here.
Oh, wow. I'm honored and privileged and humbled, honestly, Steph. So thank you for the opportunity. And I hope this is a great conversation and useful.
It's going to be amazing. And so people are going to learn so much from you. I guess like the first question just is around human-centered leadership and what does it mean to you? And what has it felt like when you've personally experienced it? And why is it so meaningful to you that you lead in a way that is very human-centered?
Oh, gosh. I think for me, it's about authenticity and being humble. So as I'm listening to myself and all the words bubbling up, I'm trying not to sound too cliched, but some of the points of things being cliched is they're actually true. I think in this case that I genuinely think leadership's a privilege, and we forget that, especially kind of in the stage and age with so much coming on and the advent of, the next wave of technology and everything else. But at the end of the day, leadership is something that's been around for literally as long as we've had human beings on the planet. And there is some core things in the way that we're wired from a neuroscience biology perspective that requires leadership of different types in different situations. And I think there's something about just at its most essential care and empathy for others and the willingness to be curious and serve the need of others, which has always been true in every aspect of leadership literature, be it Shakespeare or some Greek author or an African proverb. The same things run through over thousands of years across different cultures, across different civilizations. So there are just some core things which are around being your most authentic self that you can be in the moment, serving the needs of others, having curiosity and having care.
That's spot on. And you lead the way for that. And I think what I've experienced we both, where I met you was at Microsoft as my GM in global learning and development, where we started the initiative of Manager Reimagine and really reimagining the manager role at Microsoft specifically, and how much you brought from being a change agent and how Microsoft's culture was and what Satya wanted the culture to be from, he says it all the time, from being a know-it-all to a learn-it-all. And I think what you brought was the ability to say that in order to be a learn-it-all, you have to be authentic. And care was the word. I remember being
Mhm.
in that conference room with Kathleen and you, and we knew it had to be a word like care from the manager expectations that we created, model, coach, and care. And we knew that word care was critical in shifting the culture at Microsoft. And maybe you can talk a little bit about how and why that was a word that you and I both fought for, because we knew how critical it was going to be to change a culture from the way old school Microsoft was to the way Satya wanted to lead it. What was the difficulty for you in that role in implementing something like just even a word like care at a
Mm.
company like Microsoft?
Actually, you made me smile because I think the word we walked into the room with was love. Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
and
yeah, that's right.
that love I think in a corporate setting is perhaps inappropriate in some cases. It's not love is not a word that we see posted on sort of billboards or
Mhm,
value statements and things like that. And care is actually the right word as opposed to love. I think there's something within organizations which is around dehumanizing the human, getting back to your human centered leadership. Yeah. Which is that the effective human, in some ways, the effective manager, is devoid of emotion in some way. And it's about, particularly as you look at the history of leadership in the last 150 years in organizations. We started with reducing the role of humanity to, production lines, to checks and balances, to a very heavy focus on process optimization. Process still was very, keen in that kind of key industrial age, coming out the role of the human being to be segmented, compartmentalized, so that the human couldn't damage the machine.
mhm,
Post-war, a little bit more, but it was the human as part of a system. So if I can motivate the human, I get better output coming out. And I think there's something around um, it's going to sound a posh word, but kind of alienation of the human as something to talk about as being too soft
mhm,
in the workplace. And I think it's only as we've moved into maybe thinking of the worker as a more intelligent being and less as a worker. Even, I've worked in a couple of places where we have production or manufacturing environments that change from protecting the machine from the worker to saying, actually, I really need the worker to be vigilant and the worker to have care about the product, care about the production line, because they can spot the defect in one human eye being more effective than a lot of sensors. And so, how do I get that human being to actually be motivated to care attention in some way? I've got to feel their motivation. I've got to feel their interest. I read something last week, and I think it was, I can't remember which company, it was a car production line. And they found out these cars were coming out, and there's something in the balance was wrong every single time. And it had AI enabled, it had robotics enabled, and they weren't able to spot it. And eventually, a human eye spotted an individual worker spotted the default coming in. So there was something about the human eye that actually worked out better than the algorithms could come through. And I think this is one of the questions you're going to come to me later on about how do you provoke that for me as an individual leader. But there's something about honoring the worker in that situation. I remember working at Caterpillar, and one of the things we would do is kind of look at how do we avoid unionization, as an example of where workers felt they really needed to go to the union as opposed to trust the management in the situation. And one of the tests that the head of labor relations would do, he'd walk into a plant and say, point at a random worker and say, "Who's that?" And if the plant manager was able to say, "Oh, that's Mary. Mary has 3 kids. Her husband's got some difficulty with chemotherapy right now. They've been struggling with, their teenage daughter, etc., and tell a story about what was happening in Mary's life." That wasn't a plant that was going to go to the union. If, on the other hand, they said, "I'm not sure. That's one of our
mhm.
workers." So the degree to which the leadership knew the work of the personal story, cared, I'm getting back to the care,
Yeah.
was actually, even in a heavy manufacturing plant, was the difference between success and failure, between high safety rates, between high quality rates. So again and again, we keep coming back to this thing of care, accentuation of the human, denoting excellence in the workplace. But I think it's taken a long time for that to be something to be said out loud in organizations.
I've seen it and lived it, and I know you have in all of your but as an employee, I've seen that and lived it, and for so many years as an employee, I didn't have that from leadership, and it's almost like the minute you see it or experience it, you don't want it any other way. Because what you taught me and what I found as a leader is that when you show that care for somebody and you genuinely care about them, like you've described as a human being, knowing their struggles and knowing what their personal passions are, both personally and professionally, you can build a level of trust that makes it so people would follow you anywhere and would do anything for you and work 10 times harder for you because they know you have their back and they know you genuinely and authentically care about them as a human being. And so I double down on that as a leader because I think it's so important. And as you mentioned or alluded a little bit to this, but as we go into this era of AI, I genuinely believe this is why I'm starting this podcast. I'm writing a book. I'm starting my own company, Luminary Leadership Consulting. You can find it at theinnerluminary.com. But it's all about that piece of even the of AI, and especially how you lead through the era of AI, is the human piece is not going away. AI can manage the technology pieces that a team needs, but the leader needs to manage the human or lead the human pieces, and that machines and AI and automation, that's not going away because you still have that connection you have to make with other human beings. What are you seeing in your world? I mean, it's insanity out there right now with the race to AI and being first and the AI agents and defining what this whole new leading in the era of AI looks like. And people are worried about their jobs and people aren't sure which direction we're going. There's chaos. It's there, and I found there's lack of clarity for most, and that's causing a lot of angst and anxiety where you think the assumption is that AI would create clarity, but it's not right now because leadership is trying to get their head around what it means to be first, and employees are trying to do great work every day when directions are changing. What are you seeing at Equinix and around you in the companies that you partner with in on this topic?
Wow, that's a great question. I think there's so much being written about this right now. We're flooded with this. I think outside of just AI, to your point, we live in this world of increasing complexity. I was speaking to some colleagues just last week who were, thinking about the same issue. And one of the questions they asked as a debate was this move from a VUCA world to a BANI world. So for those of you watching this, VUCA was volatile, uncertain, chaotic, ambiguous. And it was something developed, I think, years ago by the military in terms of thinking this is what the future was going to be look like. And there's a new term as kind of that successor of BANI, which was brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. Right. So think about that in terms of certainty. And I think as we think about not just AI, but any technology, anything new coming in, as human beings, and we know this, we are built for certainty. Our neuroscience, our whole safety thing is about built for certainty. And so,
Mhm.
one of the things I know we pushed in my time at Microsoft, and we talked a lot about in other roles, and certainly where I am now, is about managers creating clarity and
Right.
how clarity as a core medium for settling the system. I think what's really interesting now is that for managers ourselves, we don't have clarity,
Right.
and for leaders ourselves, we don't have clarity. And in this world of AI, we're trying to provoke, I think, two things in particular. First, curiosity, so that we're not afraid, so that we embrace this change with a curiosity, but something we can play with, we can experiment, that we test, that we try. And secondly, adaptability as a core concept, in terms of how do I adapt my practice? How do I not react with fear, with gardens,
Right.
but instead how do I adapt my style? How do I adapt my thinking? How do I constantly learn? Yeah. And I think this
Yeah.
goes beyond, concepts that we've looked at like growth mindset and other things, um, into how do I do that for myself when actually the ground that I stand on is more uncertain than ever before? Because what is certain? If we look at, to get the geopolitical climate, the advent of AI, the way I live my life, everything is more brittle, to use that Benny term,
Yeah.
than
Great
ever
word.
before. And I think this comes back to, for me, one of the core things, back to your theme of human centered leadership, of this oxygen mask idea, that it's difficult for you to lead others in this VUCA, BANI, AI driven world if you yourself aren't centered. And I know,
Right.
and I think this is the essence of maybe the conversations, but the questions that you were posing for the discussion today, Steph, in that you have to be able to put your own oxygen mask on first before you can do that for others. And so that means, how do you yourself center yourself and be okay to say, I don't know, but how are you feeling right now? I'm uncertain too, but what does that mean for you? And so I'm acknowledging in that moment, sometimes my own uncertainty, my own curiosity. Well, I don't know, but I'm excited. But actually, you're reverting that back to immediate care for the individual, even in the face of uncertainty. Of I don't know, but we're gonna figure this out
Yeah.
together. So you're reframing, but you're providing leadership in the context of absolute chaos, in the context of absolute uncertainty, of an ever-changing world. You are in some way that certainty of that glow of love, that little rock. But to do that, you yourself have to be centered in some way. So you have to be confident in your own ego, your own experiences, your own fear, to be able to serve others.
Yeah, and to be able to, like you said, be humble and have that humanity of like, I don't have all the answers, but we're gonna figure it out together. Like I'm learning from you, you're learning from me, we're figuring all of this out. It's uncertain for all of us. That goes back to the word care, love, being like soft, seeing as soft. And to me, I see them as superpowers that you can ignite for yourself. Again, I go back to like my whole concept here with the whole luminary theme is that you have to be a luminary for yourself before you can be a luminary for others, right? And
Love that.
so in doing that and admitting I don't have all the answers on whatever topic it is, right? But we're going to figure this out together. That creates a sense of safety for people. And I think that that's what you do for the people that work around you. The reality of standing up and saying, I stand here with no ego. The world is changing and shifting every single day, but we're going to figure this out together. This is kind of the direction we're going. It may shift, it may change, but we're right here as a leadership team, or I'm right here for you to answer any questions you have. And I'll try to provide the most clarity that I can for you. Instead of just every day showing up to do, I've experienced this. You show up to do a certain set of work, what the North Star is, and then it shifts, and then you're going in that direction. The next day you're going in that direction, and people just aren't sure where their footing is. But if you're right there with them explaining, here's the why behind what I understand this change is meaning, and we're gonna move, but figure it out. I think that's so important because things are changing so quick. Leading through rapid change and ambiguity right now is e- everybody's trying to figure out how to do that. But if you can do it by standing humbly, like you described, and care, keep that foundation of care and trust, people are going to want to figure it out with you. I think, boy, now more than ever in the era of AI, that's so important. And I don't know, are you seeing what? So, what I'm kind of noticing is that a lot of companies are swinging the pendulum so far to the right of racing to win AI that they're kind of de-investing in employees, or de-investing in maybe leadership dev, or de-investing in this kind of human-centered leadership stuff because they're so focused on you gotta beat everybody else to win the AI race. And I truly genuinely believe the pendulum's gonna swing back because they're gonna realize that people aren't gonna wanna work at a company that doesn't have what you and I are speaking about. Are you seeing that, like, in the industry of maybe not a de-investment, but it's not a focus? Um,
It depends. I see both. I see the kind of the push for, well, how do we almost replace the human with AI? I
yes.
see that in some of the practices that come out, and how can we make a better human? How can we have a more always on present human? And I know, um, I'm an advocate. I have trained a bot that coaches me. Interestingly, my AI companion, reduced me to tears on a train a few weeks ago, and there is something about that.
Yeah.
That we're using companions and adapting my own leadership style because we have a new resource tool that we've never had before. So I think, to your question, you spoke in the concept of a pendulum swing, and I think maybe there is no pendulum. I think there's just a new dimension that we have to embrace altogether. And I think often when we see new technology come into the world, we see it as threat, and it is threat to everything that came before. But it means, I think, with curiosity, enthusiasm, and passion, this is a moment of reimagining completely. I mean, who would have thought that I'd be sitting on a train going into London, having deep personal conversations, but actually creating a safe space through a piece of technology that enabled me to answer some deep questions through an algorithmic analysis that maybe might take months for me to trust a human to engage with. And I would never have imagined that. And yet that's a space that I'm in. So I'm treating that with curiosity. I'm treating that with a sense of humor. I'm trying to hold that at a balance at the same side and use that back to, I think, the question of your question, to make myself a better leader. So there was a recent trip that I took, and there was a little bit of trepidation, a little bit of fear of might be going into this particular trip. And I was using this kind of coaching agent, which I'd built for myself through AI. And it enabled me when I turned up to be fully present in the room because I'd taken the space as a leader to actually explore what might be really going on for me below the surface. And the feedback I got coming out of the other side was that it was an impactful week for everyone concerned. And I know part of that was the way that I turned up, and
Yeah.
in my own personal leadership preparation, which is part of that putting my oxygen mask on first. So when I turned up in the room, I didn't have all of my baggage of my emotional state getting in the way, but I was fully prepared to be fully present for the human beings in the room. And that's not something that I was envisaged myself doing even a year ago. And so, in terms of the de-investment in the sort of formal training, I think there's something about investing in yourself and to your idea of luminary. How do I light my light within myself? So, I think there's something about not relying on the organization to do that for me, but then from the role of the organization, how do I enable people to feel the freedom or to get the sensibility that these things are still important and, in fact, more important than ever? So, I think it's something around the messaging and the context and setting this expectation for leaders that actually I need you to be more human than ever because of the degree of volatility that's happening right now.
Oh gosh, that resonates so much with me because I think it's taken me just in general, it's taken me a long time to really do that pause and zoom out, right? Like where even just in the moment, because I love how you proactively prepared the same that way, because I think that if leaders could do that more and really think, again, this is the reckoning room, hold the mirror up to yourself and go over what's beneath, what is causing me to react this way, or what is causing me to feel this way before you step into the room. It level sets it and it just creates a trust and a calm that you can then kind of approach and do anything. I love that because I've had to learn because a lot of, like I tend to be a little fiery. Like I can go from 0 to 100 like that. I think you've seen that before with me. Well, because I'm, being very passionate, but I've had to learn to go, okay, hold on a minute, Steph, you're reacting here. You're having certain feelings here. What are they? What does it mean? Are your values being triggered? Like is something from that perspective affecting you? And then why? But I've also learned to answer the questions. And I think that's where, like the tool and the coach you created for yourself, I think that's maybe where people struggle is they'll ask the question and then they'll leave the question hanging there and they won't have an answer. And that's not
Mm,
resolving it at all. But with the support of going, why might I be feeling this way? You ask yourself, you can get help from, I don't know if, your favorite book or maybe you have your therapist, but you can also now use this amazing tool that can help you just from a generalization perspective, understand why you might be feeling what you're feeling so that you can resolve it and move forward. It's setting your ego aside. It's not going in and saying, okay, I'm going to command and control this offsite or whatever, and they're going to listen to me. You've never been like that. Like I remember very specifically when you first came to your role at Microsoft in global learning and development, our first meeting, you brought us together and it wasn't at a conference table where you sat at the head of the table and talked at us. You had us bring all of the chairs together in a circle and you talked with us. It was incredible. Like I've never experienced that before. And at first I was like, what's going on? Like,
Who
but
is this hippie they've hired into the organization? Yeah.
but the reality is every single one of us was like, this is new. What's happening? But oh my God, this is incredible. The ability to build that trust so quickly, I will never forget it. How are you ensuring that the leaders that are around you and working with you and for you are doing the same, having the same approach that you are in this atmosphere?
Mm. I think it's listening and setting a tone. And by no means, it's lovely you're throwing all these compliments at me, Steph. But I know in a way what I said I'm perfect. So I know what I know, but I think we're all a work in progress, very honestly. And there's a few things I think, and again, I'm going back to old practices. I was being shadowed this week, interestingly enough, by a US Marine colonel as part of a program. And I did something similar at Microsoft. We had someone come in,
Right.
but he was talking about some of the practices and the very common across organizations. One of them being management by walking around. It's very old school quality management, Kaizen type idea. But I try to do skip levels with my team at different layers every single week. I'll dedicate time to catching up. No agenda, just creating space, just to be like, what's going on? Ask me anything. Creating open space. And at first, that doesn't work because people are like, oh, they're looking at the title, they're looking at the risk, they're like, what am I supposed to be? To your point, um, where are the chairs and the table? What am I supposed to do here? But after a while, hopefully, humanity breaks through, trust breaks through. And I always remember in these situations getting the first question because people are testing you in terms of so yeah, like it seems good, but let me throw a curveball and see. And then how you react in the moment to hold it. And I get specific to your question, where you find something out about your own leaders, it's addressing it. It's having the honest conversation and having the coaching moments coming in. But I don't think you can be an effective leader of leaders, if that makes sense, if you don't know what's going on. So I think it's about having the curiosity and making the time. I mean, going back, I'll go back to some of the manufacturing experiences that I have. The leaders that sat in the offices, that sat in meetings all day, that sat at the desk, were the leaders that had the lowest quality, the worst safety records, high production costs. The people who walked the floor every day and knew everybody at every level of the organization had the best safety records, had the highest production, had the highest quality, had the lowest cost. So there is something about knowing the organization, and that's not something you just do with data. That's something about checking in with the humans around you on a regular basis.
Yeah. It's interesting is if you remember, we were always asked at Microsoft during Manager Reimagine project, how are you going to measure behavior change? Because behavior change is the hardest thing to measure. You can measure, attendance of training, you can and things like that. But how are you going to actually look at behavior change? And I think one of the things that companies fall prey to is that I'll just take the company poll results as they are. When if you haven't created the safe space like you're talking about around filling out that poll, people aren't going to fill it out honestly. And then you're going to have, you're going to rely on data that is not accurate. And so what you really have to do is what you said, listening tours, going and meeting people one-on-one and listening to them from a place where they can be honest with you, not where a place where they feel like they're going to be retaliated against or have to watch what I'm going to say because it could be used against me later on. But when you can really go and create that kind of environment, that's when you can see the behavior change between when it's working for people and when it's not. It's not just through the poll data; it's through what's employee relations saying. What are the things that are bubbling to that team the most? What are people saying when they leave the company? Because when you're leaving, most people don't like to burn bridges, but they'll be more honest potentially then of the why. But if we can get to that before they leave, before they are in a space where they have to feel like they have to go to employee relations, that's when you see a shift in the culture too. And I think we were seeing it at Microsoft I'm super proud of that. I felt, especially with Satya, it was a shift to the kind of Microsoft that everybody wanted, and Microsoft needed to be in the industry. So I'm happy to hear that you're leading that way for everybody around you, including your leaders. You mentioned listening because I feel like that's one thing that that I think about a lot, and that it's listening from the words that people are saying, but it's also listening and paying attention to the nonverbal cues that people are sharing with you,
Mm.
that they might not even know. Maybe you can share with me a time when truly listening made all of the difference, because I think a lot of times leaders, they're so busy, they don't have time to empathetically listen. They are preparing their response or whatever it might be. Um, but you truly just sit and give the space and listen. What's a time that made a
Oh
difference?
gosh, the one that comes to mind is actually a data-driven one, interestingly, to that question. So I remember getting a piece of data um, from from Microsoft, interestingly, and this is such a great case study, that said for every hour of email that I sent
Ooh,
on the weekend, it generated 8 hours of work in my team. And if you remember me having that realization. So often I'd be like,
yeah,
hey, it's Saturday, it's Sunday, I just had a thought, I'm gonna drop something down. Don't worry about this till Monday. But then the analysis came down and said, hey, 4 hours of work from you at the weekend and email sent created 50 or 60 hours of
yeah,
work for the team coming through. And there's a couple of things there. So um, I was genuinely thinking, I'm working in my own time. I'm not impacting the team. But I thought about that and thought about, the without rest, the impact on the team. So I absolutely changed my behavior like a guillotine, and moved it around. So like an amazing impact that, data-driven behavior change coming through. I think the other moments are where people tell personal stories about the impact. Here's a positive one. I remember running a program early in my career, while I'm still working in a hospital. I started on the more clinical side and working with a particular manager, doing some work with her and really listening and giving. And she wanted time, and I was busy, and I was like, no, let me listen and just listen, 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 and create space for her to listen. I remember being really busy and being almost annoyed that she's taking a lot of my time.
mhm,
And she came in a week later and said that she'd filled her car up with petrol for the first time, that she'd been married for 15 years. She wasn't allowed to touch the car, but for the first time, she'd actually put petrol in her car. It was something that her husband did all the time. And for her, this was a massive breakthrough. And it turned out, she was talking about work issues to me, but giving her the space to work some stuff out, which was about work, actually related to her whole life. And she, without going into the whole thing, she left her husband, created a new career, became actually started her own company, became a CEO in her own right of her own small business.
wow,
And we talked about that afterwards, and it was literally me creating the space as a leader enabled her to process some stuff, which led to her putting petrol in her car, which was like such a breakthrough moment for her. She was so proud when she came in. And this is just a small thing in someone's life
yeah,
when you think about
yeah,
it that
yeah,
you've been able to impact. And those are the best moments, are there? That you've been able as a leader to impact someone's life, to be able to put petrol in their own car, that then change to a monumental lift. And that to me is the
yeah,
privilege of leadership, that you get the chance to impact other humans in some way. And never forgetting that, I could easily with annoyance have said, I haven't got time for you.
mhm, mhm. Oh my god. Like, that's everything, and you said the word privilege of being a leader, like, that just that word, and having people come back to you, like, probably like I do to you, and say, "Do you even realize the shift that you made for me, the ripple effect that your kindness or your listening made for me as a leader to other people?" I find no greater joy than that, and that is why I'm so proud and feel so honored to be able to be a leader of others. And you don't even know, maybe in the moment, the smallest thing makes the biggest shift in people. And it's happened to me. And I am honored that I get to be in a space where I can, potentially have that kind of effect on other people just by being a good human being. It's pretty profound. One of the things that I'm interested in is, what is the shadow that follows you into every room, no matter how
Mm.
much work you've done on yourself or to overcome? Like, what's the shadow or thing that's
Oh
kind of always
gosh. So years of practice and therapy and whatever to get to this
Yeah,
moment,
I hear
Steph.
you.
But I think it's unique for every leader, honestly, because it all has to do with who you are, where you came from, and etc. For me, it's the I don't belong. Yeah.
Yeah,
So if I think about my background and I think about my social circles in London, who I grew up with, um, I remember taking my children a few years ago back to Guyana, where I grew up for part of my childhood, and they looked at the street where I lived in, and the street has wooden houses on stilts with a trench, etc. And in Guyana, they were kind of like, "You grew up here," and they were looking at this house in Seattle that we live in now,
yeah,
compared
yeah,
to this, wooden house, and so we all have journeys about how we got here. So this is for me, this is a piece about as I look around, given my unique background, I don't belong here.
mm,
And everybody else knows I don't belong here and they don't want me here and I just don't belong. So there's something around belonging for me, which is the shadow. And it's then, having to have that conversation with yourself of, well, I am
yeah,
here. And given that I'm here, how do I be the best human? How do I be the best version of myself,
yeah,
etc. in this moment? But we all have those narratives that walk into the
yeah,
room, and those block us. So back to that thing of putting the oxygen mask on first. If you as a leader don't do the work to be able to quell those inner narratives, that shadow, as you called it, that walks in, that shadow turns up, and that's how you deal with people in your worst moments of stress because you're not in control.
right, right.
Yeah, and we
That's
see that in every Shakespeare tragedy, in every in every play, all the way
yeah,
through. This again is not something new. This is something that humanity has known for a long time.
yes, that resonates so much with me because I remember being, a female in engineering. I'm not even gonna tell you how many years ago. It was a long time ago. I was very young when I started Microsoft, no. Um, but being a female in the room full of engineers, it took me time to find my voice and learn that there's, like, so many times I would leave the room not saying anything because I was intimidated or, like, I wasn't seeing I was basically invisible in the room, right? And so and I also it but I realized that I was blaming other people for that when the reality was it was my job to show up and kind of come not command, but take my seat at the table and not make my voice quiet and make them hear
Mm,
me. So that took a little bit of time and it took courage and resilience, of course. But I now, if I have something to say, I'm not going to leave a room feeling regret that I didn't say it, an idea, a thought, anything, because I myself was making myself feel like I what nobody wants to hear what you have to say. You aren't smart enough to have an opinion in this room full of leaders, or don't say anything because you're going to look foolish and they're going to brand you as not being worth working. Like all of those terrible things you tell yourself. But the reality is, if like what you said, if you can kind of reconcile that with yourself, before you walk into these rooms,
mm.
then I don't know, I feel like it's more of a self-confidence where you get to take the power
Mm.
back. It's yours
I,
to take.
and I wanted to build on your question around in the era of AI because going back to that kind of VUCA Banny state, this more stressful state, this more curious state, this state of the world where so much is changing, it means that we ourselves as leaders are destabilized. And
Yeah,
so, how do we turn up as our best selves if we're not taking the time to do the work on ourselves first? Because then there's an arrogance almost of, well, how I turn up must be perfect. I don't need the work. And
right,
it's
right.
everybody else's fault. Why aren't they getting with the program? But actually, they're probably not getting on the program because of you. So there's something about, that mirror moment and dedicating even more time than normal to being able to lead teams in moments of that are brittle.
Yeah, yeah. So I've created a card game that's in prototype right now called Am I the Problem? It's a leadership reckoning card game. Self-awareness hurts, play anyway. So
Mm.
it's really about holding the mirror up to yourself, right? And like you said, like we've talked about, this whole podcast is around Am I being humble? Am I showing up how I want to show up? Am I leading the
Mm.
way I want to lead, modeling the way, not just standing up and in front of a room and being one way and then, being a different way behind closed doors. My plan is that at the end of every podcast, I'm going to pull one of the cards and ask one of the questions from the game so
Okay,
that,
what's my card?
okay, your card is, what's a part of yourself you've hidden to be seen as credible? And what is
Mhm.
the cost of that disguise?
Oh gosh. It's the child within.
Mm,
It's the child within. So there was a cusp point. I was actually at American Express, and I had like a double or triple promotion. So I went from a sort of like a bup 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 at one move. Okay. And so they got me an executive coach who was amazing. If she's by any chance watching this, like, changed my life. But one of the things I observed in the work that I did, the theme of my development there was from the barricades to the boardroom. That was the theme of my development plan, from the barricades to the boardroom, as seeing as someone who should be outside, throwing like seeing myself
mhm,
as some kind of rebel. But also, she noticed that in meetings, I used to get so enthusiastic. She said I used to bounce like with energy,
uh-huh,
So there was something about just a raw enthusiasm and just joy of childlike energy that I know in corporate worlds I have to control. So there's a part of me that I have to squish, that I have to sit on, that if I turn up like that, it looks too childlike, it looks immature, the raw enthusiasm. So there are parts where, as much as I can, and some people know that who know me watching it going, you're doing a terrible job, you still come across with high energy. But for I would say 80% of just the raw joy, enthusiasm, everything else, because of the corporate environment, you have to
yeah,
sit on. And so there's a
yeah,
part of me that is lost, I
yeah.
think, as you enter. And for all of us, there's this thing where I often say, we can behave with humans in a really human way. We can give feedback to someone at the petrol station, in the shop, in whatever. And then
Mhm.
I walk into the organization and I struggle to give feedback. Why is that? Because there's an element as I walk through the organizational door that I lose out some small element of my humanity that disables me
Yeah,
in some way.
yeah. Which makes my heart hurt a little bit because 'cause I've been in those
Mm.
rooms where you show that excitement. There's nothing that gets others excited along with you than you being that way. Like, "Oh my god, I don't know which direction we're going, but I'm gonna follow him." Like, what I don't care what his idea is. He's got something exciting that I wanna be a part of. And that's what that childlike excitement, enthusiasm in the conference rooms and in meetings does for the people around you. It's like, "Oh my god, I want some of that. I wanna be a part of that because it's gonna be big. Even if I don't know what it is yet, it's gonna be amazing if I'm a part of it." That's how you made me feel in those rooms, so
But imagine then you're getting the drip or the cup rather than the fire hose that's actually inside. So
no, that too. That too, where you're like, "Oh my god, it's really I can't, like, it's too much." No, it's still gosh, that went by so fast. I
it
can't
really
thank you.
did.
I mean, I could talk to you forever as always, and I'm so thankful that you were in my life when you came into my life. It was a pivotal moment for me. You helped me really double down on my purpose and passion and what I want to do. You helped me get here to where I'm at now to be able to have the confidence that people might want to hear what I have to say and
They
you
will,
helped
Steph. Absolutely.
me.
I just
Like
applaud you on your journey of lazy. I know you had huge followership in the time that I worked with you. You were a great mentor. So I just wish you every luck and go Luminary.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being like your courage and your humanity here and being so honest and showing that powerful leaders are the ones who stay curious and grounded and willing to do the work on themselves. So I can't thank you so much. And just to everyone listening, take a moment, notice what made you stop and think today, what stretched your perspective, what opened a new possibility for you because reckoning isn't about getting it perfect. It's about staying awake to who you're becoming. So until next time, keep the lantern lit and keep doing the real work.